Okay, let's unpack this. Teaching a computer to tie shoes or walk without, bumping into everything.
Right. Things that are totally second nature for us.
Exactly. But trying to actually code those rules is surprisingly difficult.
It really is. But that's where this field reinforcement learning RL comes in. It's got this really ingenious approach.
Yeah, it's more like how we learn, right?
Yeah.
Kind of messing around, trial and error, seeing what works.
Getting that feedback, yeah.
Yeah.
A little mental reward or maybe a digital nope.
And it's not just theory, is it? We've seen some pretty mind-blowing results recently.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about AlphaGo beating the world's best Go players back in 2016. That was huge.
A real landmark moment.
And then, just a couple of years later, OpenAI 5 takes on professional Dota 2 players
Right.
in that incredibly complex game.
And now robots solving Rubik's Cubes. It's wild.
And the key is, they weren't programmed step by step for those specific things. They essentially learned it themselves through RL.
Right. So that's what we want to do in this deep dive. Break down reinforcement learning. We'll look at the core ideas, how it works in practice, even the surprising links to neuroscience.
And where it might be heading next.
Exactly, because honestly, this feels like technology that's going to be really important in the coming years.
I completely agree. So, at its heart, what we're talking about is an agent, could be an AI, a robot, whatever we're training.
The learner.
The learner, yes. And it learns to make good choices by interacting with its environment, its surroundings.
So it does something, an action.
And the environment reacts, gives it some feedback, maybe a reward, like a point or a penalty.
It's kind of like training a dog, maybe. Give a command, they do it, they get a treat. The environment is the dog plus the situation.
That's a pretty good analogy, actually. And to formalize this, researchers often use something called a Markov decision process, or MDP.
Okay, MDP. Sounds technical.
It's just a way to structure the learning problem. Think of it as a sequence of moments.
Hmm.
The agent is in a certain state, it takes an action, gets a reward, and lands in a new state. Then repeat.
State, action, reward, new state. Got it. And the Markov part, what's key there?
The Markov property is really important. It basically says that the next state depends only on the current state and the action taken right now. The past history doesn't matter for predicting the immediate future.
Okay. So what happens next depends only on where I am now and what I do now. Simplifies things, I guess.
Massively. It stops the agent from needing to remember everything that ever happened. So two other key ideas we need are the policy and the return.
Right, the policy. That's like the agent's game plan.
Exactly. It's the strategy, often written as PI. It maps states to actions, tells the agent what to do in any given situation.
And the return. That's the goal.
Pretty much. The return, usually G, is the total reward the agent expects to get over the long haul. But often we discount future rewards. A reward now might be better than the same reward later.
Ah, the discount factor.
Gamma. That's the one. Gamma. It's a number between 0 and 1. If gamma is close to 1, the agent is far-sighted, cares a lot about future rewards. If it's close to 0, it's more short-sighted.
Like preferring the treat right now over maybe getting 2 treats later.
Exactly. And the ultimate goal, the whole point of RL, is to find the policy, that perfect strategy that maximizes this cumulative discounted reward, the return.
Okay, theory makes sense. Let's ground this. How about a simple example, like a maze, a grid world?
Perfect. Imagine a simple grid. The agent starts somewhere, and there's a target, maybe some cheese, it needs to reach.
So the state is just its position, like coordinates, x, y.
Yep. And the actions are simple. Move up, down, left, or right.
And the rewards.
We could give it a small negative reward,
Right.
say -1, for every step it takes.
Yeah.
That encourages it to be efficient.
Right, don't wander around forever.
And then when it finally reaches the cheese, maybe it gets a reward of 0. Task complete.
Now, you mentioned world models before. How do they fit in here?
So a world model is like the agent having an internal map or understanding of the maze's rules. It could predict, if I'm at 3-4 and I move right, I'll end up at 4-4 and get a reward of Amy 1.
It simulates the world internally.
Exactly. But many RL methods, like the first one we'll look at, Monte Carlo, are model-free. They don't need that internal map.
Okay, so how does Monte Carlo work then, without a map?
It learns purely from raw experience. The agent just starts exploring the grid, maybe moving randomly at first. It wanders around until it finds the cheese. That whole journey, from start to finish, is called an episode.
So just tries stuff out, bumps into walls, goes in circles maybe.
Potentially, yeah. Especially early on. After each episode finishes, it looks back at all the rewards it collected along that specific path.
And that total reward for one run-through is the return for that episode.
Exactly. It calculates the return it got, starting from each state it visited during that episode. By doing this over and over for many random episodes, it starts to build up an average picture. It learns, oh, being in this square tends to lead to better overall returns than being in that square.
Ah, and that's where these value functions come in, V and Q.
Precisely. The V function, or state value function, estimates how good it is to be in a particular state, assuming you follow your current policy from then on.
So V tells you the long-term value of a location.
Right. And the Q function, or action value function, is slightly different. It tells you how good it is to take a specific action, like move right, when you are in a particular state, again, assuming you follow your policy afterwards.
Okay, so V is about the state's value. Q is about the value of taking an action in that state.
You've got it. And as the agent runs more episodes, its estimates of these V and Q values get better and better.
And that lets it improve its strategy.
Yes, through something called generalized policy iteration. It's like a cycle. First, you evaluate your current policy. Figure out the V or Q values for it. That's policy evaluation. Then, you update your policy to be greedy with respect to those values, meaning in each state, you choose the action that looks best according to your current Q values. That's policy improvement.
Evaluate, then improve. Then evaluate the new policy, then improve again.
Exactly. You keep iterating between evaluating and improving, and eventually you converge towards the best possible policy.
Makes sense. But wait, if it always just takes the action that looks best based on what it knows, how does it find new, potentially even better paths it hasn't tried yet?
Excellent question. That's the classic exploration-exploitation dilemma.
Right. Exploit the good paths,
Yeah.
but also explore to find better ones.
Exactly. You need to balance sticking with what works, exploitation, and trying new things, exploration.
So how do you actually do that?
A very common and simple strategy is called epsilon greedy.
Epsilon greedy, okay.
You pick a small number, epsilon, say 0.1. Then 90% of the time, 1 epsilon, you exploit. You choose the action that currently has the highest estimated Q value.
The greedy choice.
Right. But 10% of the time, with probability epsilon, you explore. You pick a random action, regardless of its Q value.
Ah, okay. So mostly stick with the best, but occasionally take a random detour just to see what happens.
Precisely. It's a simple way to ensure you keep learning and don't get stuck in a rut.
Okay, so Monte Carlo waits until the whole episode is over. Feels a bit slow. You mentioned temporal difference learning earlier. TD learning, that's faster.
It typically is, yes. The big advantage of TD learning is that it updates its value estimates after every single step, rather than waiting for the end of the episode.
So move one square, get a reward, update your knowledge immediately.
Exactly. It uses the reward it just received, plus its current estimate of the value of the next state, to update the value estimate of the state it just left. It's called bootstrapping, because it's updating its guess based on another guess.
Right, learning from incomplete information step by step. That sounds much more efficient. Addresses that credit assignment problem, figuring out which specific steps were good or bad.
It helps significantly, yes, because the updates happen much sooner after the action is taken. Now, there are a few main TD algorithms. SARSA, expected SARSA, and Q-learning are probably the most foundational.
Okay, what's the main difference between them?
The key difference lies in how they use the information about the next step to update the current value. SARSA is on policy.
On policy, meaning?
It learns the value of the policy it is currently following. When it updates the Q value for state S and action A, it looks at the reward R it got and the actual action A it takes in the next state S according to its current policy, hence SAR-SA.
Ah, state action, reward, state action. Makes sense. Learning based on what it actually did next.
Exactly. Expected SARSA is also on policy, but instead of using the single action A it actually took, it considers all possible actions it might take from S according to its policy and calculates the expected value across those actions.
A bit more robust, maybe, averaging things out.
Potentially, yes. Now, Q-learning is different. It's off policy.
Off policy, so it doesn't learn about the policy it's currently following.
Not directly. Q-learning tries to learn the optimal Q function directly, regardless of the exploration policy being used. When it updates the Q value for state S and action A, it looks at the reward R, but then it considers the value of the best possible action it could take from the next state S. It doesn't care what action the exploration policy, like epsilon greedy, would actually choose next.
Whoa, okay. So Q-learning is always aiming for the ultimate best path, even while it's exploring potentially non-optimal moves.
That's the idea. It separates the policy being learned, the optimal one, from the policy used to generate behavior, the exploratory one. And often, this makes Q-learning more sample efficient. It learns faster, especially in complex environments.
And this links back to that Bellman equation thing. Q-learning is trying to satisfy the optimality equation.
Precisely. The Bellman optimality equation defines the value of the optimal policy. Q-learning's update rule is essentially trying to iteratively make its Q values satisfy that equation. It's directly approximating the best possible action values.
Okay, wow. So TD methods like Q-learning are great improvements, but these grid worlds, they have distinct squares, discrete states. What about messy real-world stuff where the state isn't just a grid location, but maybe like continuous values, sensor readings?
Excellent point. That's where the tabular methods we've discussed, keeping track of values in a big table for every state or state action pair, break down. If you have continuous states, like the exact position and velocity of a robot arm, you have infinitely many states. You can't make a table big enough.
So how do we handle that? Neural networks.
Exactly. This is where deep Q networks, or DQNs, come in. They combine Q-learning with the power of deep neural networks.
Okay, so the neural network learns the Q function instead of the table.
Precisely. The neural network acts as a function approximator. You feed it the continuous state description as input.
Like the robot arm's joint angles and velocities.
And the network outputs the estimated Q values for each discrete action the agent could take.
Ah, okay. So the state can be continuous, but the actions still need to be discrete for DQN.
Yes, that's a crucial point for standard DQNs.
Hmm.
They are value-based methods, fundamentally estimating the value of distinct actions. A great example is the lunar lander environment.
Oh yeah, I've seen videos of that. Trying to land the little spaceship.
Right. The state is continuous.
Yeah.
Position, x, y, velocity, vx, vi, angle, angular velocity, whether the legs are touching the ground. Lots of continuous numbers.
But the actions are discrete.
Yep. You can fire the main engine, fire the left thruster, fire the right thruster, or do nothing. Just 4 distinct choices.
So the DQN takes all those continuous state readings and outputs 4 numbers, the estimated Q values for each of the 4 possible actions.
Exactly. And then, usually using epsilon greedy, it picks an action based on those Q values. The neural network learns to map the complex continuous state to the best discrete action.
And you mentioned we can kind of visualize what it learns.
Yes, sometimes you can. You can feed different state configurations into the trained network and see which action it prefers, which Q value is highest. It gives you some insight into the strategy it's developed, like, oh, when it's tilted this way and falling fast, it learns to fire the side thruster.
That's really cool, getting a glimpse inside the AI's head. And there are advanced versions like double DQN and dueling DQN.
Absolutely. The original DQN was revolutionary, but it had some issues, like tending to overestimate Q values. Double DQN helps fix that. Dueling DQN changes the network architecture to estimate state values and action advantages separately, which can sometimes speed up learning.
Okay, so DQNs handle continuous states but need discrete actions. What if the action itself needs to be continuous, like how much throttle to apply or the exact angle to turn a steering wheel?
Right. For that, we need a different family of algorithms. Policy gradient method.
Policy gradients. So these learn the policy directly instead of learning values first.
Exactly. Instead of learning a Q function and then deriving a policy from it, policy gradient methods directly optimize the parameters of the policy itself.
And that's what lets them handle continuous actions. How?
They often represent the policy as a probability distribution over actions. For continuous actions, this might be, say, a Gaussian or normal distribution. The neural network learns to output the parameters of this distribution, like the mean, the best guess for the action, and the standard deviation, how much variation or exploration is okay around that mean.
Ah, so instead of outputting Q values, the network outputs, like, aim for steering angle 15.7 degrees with a bit of wiggle room.
Pretty much. Then, to choose an action, you sample from that distribution.
Okay, and how does it learn? What's it optimizing?
It optimizes an objective function, usually called J, which measures the expected total reward, the return, under the current policy. The goal is to adjust the policy's parameters, the neural network's weights, to increase J.
And there's a theorem for that, the policy gradient theorem.
Yes. The policy gradient theorem provides the mathematical justification. It tells us how to calculate the gradient, the direction to nudge the policy parameters to improve the expected return.
Got it. Now, I saw something about advantage functions being important here. How much better an action is than average?
Right. Instead of just using the raw return to guide the policy update, it's often much better to use the advantage of an action. That is, how much better was the return you got after taking this action compared to the average return you'd expect from this state?
So it focuses the learning on actions that were surprisingly good or surprisingly bad.
Exactly. It reduces variance and often stabilizes learning. There are various ways to estimate this advantage, from simple reward-to-go calculations to more complex methods like generalized advantage estimation, GAE.
Okay, and this ties into actor-critics methods. Sounds like a tag team.
It really is. Actor-critic methods combine the best of both worlds. You have two components, often two neural networks.
An actor and a critic.
Yep. The actor is the policy network. It decides which action to take. The critic is a value network. It learns a value function, like V or Q, to evaluate the states or actions chosen by the actor.
So the critic judges the actor's performance.
Kind of, yeah. The critic estimates the value or advantage of the actor's actions, and this estimate is used to provide a better learning signal, a better gradient for updating the actor's policy. The actor learns to take actions that the critic approves of.
Like a coach providing feedback.
That's a great analogy. And these actor-critic methods are very powerful. They can learn policies for both discrete actions, like lunar lander again, or for continuous actions, like controlling a bipedal walker robot, getting it to walk by outputting precise torque values for its joints.
And these have state-of-the-art versions too, like PPO and SAC.
Absolutely. Proximal Policy Optimization, PPO, and Soft Actor Critic, SAC, are very popular and effective modern actor-critic algorithms. They incorporate clever techniques to ensure stable updates and encourage exploration, making them really good at complex control tasks. PPO, for instance, uses a clipping mechanism to prevent the policy from changing too drastically in one go.
Okay, PPO.
And SAC adds an entropy bonus to its objective, which actively encourages the policy to be as random as possible while still achieving high rewards. This really helps with exploration.
Wow, the algorithmic side is deep. But what really got me was the connection to neuroscience. Our brains might actually be doing something like this.
It's truly one of the most fascinating intersections in science, I think. The parallels between RL algorithms and how biological brains seem to learn are remarkable.
Let's start with dopamine, the reward chemical, but it's more nuanced than that, right? The reward prediction error hypothesis.
Exactly. This largely comes from seminal work by Wolfram Schultz and others, studying dopamine neurons in monkeys. What they found was that dopamine neurons don't just fire when a reward is received, they fire in response to unexpected rewards.
So surprise rewards trigger dopamine.
Yes. And even more intriguingly, as the monkey learns that a certain cue, like a light flashing, predicts a reward.
The dopamine burst shifts.
Precisely. The dopamine neurons stop firing for the reward itself and start firing in response to the cue, the earliest predictor of the reward.
Whoa.
And if the predicted reward doesn't arrive, there's a dip in dopamine firing below its baseline level, a negative prediction error.
That sounds exactly like the TD error signal we talked about in temporal difference learning, the difference between expected reward and actual reward.
The similarity is uncanny. The TD error in the algorithms functions just like this dopamine signal. It signals discrepancies between expectation and reality, driving the learning process.
So our brains might literally be implementing TD learning.
The evidence is very suggestive. And it gets even better when you think about actor-critic methods.
How so? Specific brain regions involved.
It seems plausible. Key areas in the basal ganglia, particularly the striatum, seem to map quite well onto the actor-critic structure.
The striatum. Okay.
The dorsolateral part of striatum is heavily implicated in habit formation and action selection, choosing what to do. That sounds a lot like the actor.
Right, the policy.
And the ventral striatum is strongly associated with reward processing and evaluating the value of outcomes, predicting how good things will be. That sounds like the critic.
Evaluating the situation. Actor does, critic evaluates. Makes sense.
And guess what kind of signal projects heavily to both these areas?
Let me guess. Dopamine. The TB error signal.
You got it. The dopamine signal encoding that prediction error feeds into both the action selection areas and the evaluation areas, just like the TD error is used to update both the actor and the critic in the algorithms.
That's incredible. The convergence between the algorithms we design and the biological mechanisms that evolved over millions of years.
It really is profound. It suggests that these RL principles might be fundamental computational strategies for adaptive behavior, discovered both by evolution and by computer science.
Okay, this is all incredibly exciting. But let's be realistic. I remember seeing an article a while back, pretty blunt title, Deep Reinforcement Learning Doesn't Work Yet. What are the big hurdles still?
Yeah, that 2018 piece made some important waves, and honestly, many of the challenges it highlighted are still active areas of research. One major issue is reliability or robustness,
Meaning?
meaning that training deep RL agents can be really finicky. Performance can vary wildly depending on the random seed used to initialize the network weights, or tiny changes in hyperparameters, or slight variations in the environment.
So you might train it 10 times and get 10 very different results, some good, some terrible. Not ideal for real-world deployment.
Not at all. Reproducibility can be a real challenge. Another huge one is sample efficiency.
Needing tons and tons of data to learn.
Exactly. Many deep RL algorithms need millions, sometimes billions, of interactions with the environment to learn a task that a human might pick up in, minutes or hours.
Like learning to play an Atari game, we might figure it out quickly, but the AI needs to play for the equivalent of decades.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
This makes training very slow and expensive, especially if interacting with the real world is involved, like with robotics.
Okay, so unreliability and needing massive amounts of data are big problems. What are the promising ways forward? Where's the research focused?
Two major directions are showing a lot of promise. First, model-based reinforcement learning.
Right, we touched on world models earlier, learning an internal simulation of the environment.
Exactly. Instead of just learning from trial and error in the real world or a direct simulation, the agent first learns a model of the world. It learns the rules, the dynamics.
How things work.
Yeah. Then it can use this internal model to plan, to mentally simulate sequences of actions and predict their outcomes, or even to generate purely imagined experiences to learn from, drastically reducing the need for real-world interaction.
So it can practice much faster in its head.
That's the core idea. Algorithms like DeepMind's Mu-Zero, which achieved superhuman performance in Go, chess, shogi, and Atari games using a learned model, or the Dreamer series of agents, are really pushing the boundaries here.
Okay, model-based RL, what's the other promising direction?
Learning from demonstration. This includes things like imitation learning and inverse reinforcement learning.
So learning by watching an expert.
Essentially, yes. In imitation learning, the agent learns to perform a task by directly mimicking trajectories or behaviors provided by an expert demonstrator. This can be much more efficient than pure exploration for complex tasks where good rewards are sparse.
Useful when it's hard to even define a reward function, maybe? Like, how do you assign reward points for driving smoothly?
Exactly. Or for complex robotic manipulation. And inverse reinforcement learning, IRL, goes a step further. Instead of just copying the actions, IRL tries to infer the reward function that the expert was likely optimizing.
Trying to figure out the expert's goals just by watching them?
Precisely. If you can figure out the underlying reward, you might be able to learn a policy that's even better or more robust than the expert's original demonstrations. Both imitation and inverse RL are crucial for making RL practical in domains where designing good reward functions is hard, or where we want AI to learn human-like skills.
It really feels like these approaches, building world models and learning from examples, could bridge the gap to more practical, reliable RL.
There are definitely key research frontiers that hold tremendous potential to address the current limitations and unlock wider applications.
Well, this has been quite the journey. We've gone from the basic idea of agents learning through rewards and penalties.
All the way through the maths of MDPs, the trial and error of Monte Carlo.
The step-by-step learning of TD methods like Q-learning.
The power of deep Q networks for complex states, and policy gradients for continuous actions.
Including those sophisticated actor-critic approaches like PPO and SAC.
And we can't forget those incredible parallels with neuroscience, the dopamine prediction errors, the potential actor-critic structures in the brain. It's really mind-bending stuff.
Absolutely. And we've also touched on the real-world challenges, the need for more reliability, better sample efficiency.
But also the exciting paths forward with model-based RL and learning from demonstrations.
It really paints a picture of a field that's evolving rapidly, building on these foundational ideas.
Which leads to a final thought, really. As AI systems become more integrated into our physical world, think self-driving cars, robotics in manufacturing or homes, logistics, how critical will it be for these systems to learn and adapt on the fly, using these RL principles in environments that are constantly changing and unpredictable?
It seems almost essential, doesn't it?
It really does. Understanding these core concepts we've discussed today, MDPs, value functions, policy optimization, the trade-offs feels increasingly vital for anyone wanting to understand, develop, or even just interact with the intelligent systems shaping our future.